Well, good morning, everyone. I just could only hope that you know the great joy and privilege that I have each year in being with many of you and some new faces as well. So I thank you because as much as I try to give, I certainly do receive. I always leave more enthusiastic, more inspired by the good and great examples that you are, especially in Catholic education. So I thank you. I thank you for your witness. I thank you for your love for Catholic education, but of course, your love for Christ, which is seen. And so know that it does make a difference. It makes the difference in the lives of our young people who we form, and it certainly makes a difference in my life and in my own vocation. So how wonderful it is for me to be here with all of you. We know that our young people need heroes. They need people that are an example, role models, who can inspire them, who can help them, who can be a positive influence in their lives. I guess growing up, my hero was the first baseman of the New York Yankees, Don Mattingly. I tried to imitate everything he did. I tried to have the batting stance like him, tried to throw and catch like him. He had a mustache, which I was unable to grow back then, so I would even draw one on my face to look like him. Then I realized that I was terrible in baseball and that there was no way I was going to be the next Don Mattingly. So I had to look for a new hero. That hero became my older brother. And boy, did I wanted to be just like him. His likes became my likes. His dislikes became my dislikes. But then he had a girlfriend and he abandoned me. So it was time to find yet another hero. Then I entered the high school seminary, and there I found a different type of hero. Priests. Men who inspired me. Some great teachers, some who were just present, who were my spiritual directors. I was able to see them up close and personal. They became examples. They became role models. They inspired me every day to this day and have had a great and positive influence on my life. As I look back and I ask myself, what is it that made them so inspiring? What is it that helped me in forming me, not just towards my vocation as a priest, but also as a good Catholic? Why were they my heroes? And it's very much summarized by the topic of this morning, these Catholic things. These were priests who reverently and devoutly celebrated the liturgy, who had a joy for their vocation, and who had lived and strived to live sanctity, like the lives of the saints. Because the school was Catholic, had the Catholic environment, had all of the things that we would describe as a good Catholic school. But ultimately, the priest lived it. It was part of their essence. It was part of their being. And so this morning, allow me to talk a little bit about these Catholic things and how important it is not just to have them in Catholic schools, but more importantly, to live them and allow them to be part of our very being. Less than a month ago, my parents celebrated their 54th wedding anniversary. And there's always this tradition that when my parents come together to celebrate their anniversary with the family, they always tell the story how they first met. It's like this tradition that we always have. They were both in high school, my mother a few years younger than my father, and my dad's best friend in high school was my uncle. So one day my grandmother and uncle picked up my father for ice cream, and who is in the back seat but someone that my father would describe the most beautiful and most attractive young girl. From that moment on, that physical attraction came something greater, something stronger, something more beautiful. That physical attraction grew into love. an unconditional love, a love that has only grown since. When I was preparing for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, I asked my father how he knew that my mother was the one. He told the story of how, when they were dating, my mother got sick. She was coughing, she was sneezing, she was blowing her nose. And yet, as my father said, she still looked beautiful. My point is this, that the externals matter. What is seen matters. The physical matters. And so when we speak about the Catholic things in our schools, we speak about liturgy, because what we do, how we do it, and the way that we do it inspires, allows our young men and women in our schools not just to have an experience, but an encounter with Christ in such a way that it changes their lives forever. And so we take a moment just to speak briefly about the important place that liturgy has in our Catholic schools and the important role that we have in presiding over those liturgies. Because when Mass is celebrated devoutly and reverently, when it is beautiful and when it is sacred, when we celebrate Mass in such a way that it communicates the importance, that what we do at Mass is the most important thing that we do throughout the day, from those externals, something greater, something stronger, something more beautiful can occur. And that is that our young people can fall in love with Jesus Christ. And it doesn't matter whether we have Latin, it doesn't matter if it's praise and worship. I've seen very beautiful liturgy in both. I've seen terrible liturgy in both. What matters is that it's sacred, devout, reverent. What matters is that when we celebrate Mass, young people look at us and they know what we do is not just a performance, but it's our livelihood. You know, some of the seniors who go on to the college seminary, they get accused of kind of being clerical because they like the vestments, they like incense, they like the externals. And I always find that rather funny, because to kind of call an 18-year-old clerical because he likes the externals, it's like calling an 18-year-old young man superficial because he likes the way that a girl looks, right? We need to make what we do appealing and attractive. We need to make it look good so that people know its importance, so that people know that what we do is part of our being. I think of my own vocation, my own relationship with God. You know, my parish was far from high church, but the liturgy very much inspired and very much re-inspired me, especially the Sacred Triduum. I remember going to Holy Thursday as a young boy, and the incense and the music and the movement. It was done beautifully. It was done well. My older brother had left, and he said, "Boy, no one does it better than us Catholics." I left saying, I want to do what that priest is doing. And it certainly helped me in my own formation and discernment. So we see the important place that liturgy has in not just what we do, but it's who we are. The second topic is on vocations, the importance of vocations. Years ago in the Diocese of Brooklyn, Bishop DiMarzio, the bishop back then, had St. John's University do a poll of why there was such lack of vocations. And the number one answer of why young men do not become priests was not because of lack of family support, was not because of celibacy, The number one answer was because no one asked them to. No one invited them to be a priest. Now, how is that invitation given? It's not just by speaking about it, not just by going to them and actually inviting them. Certainly that has its place. But it's also the invitation by our joy, by our happiness. Stephen Rossetti, who I know a name that you know, did a survey in the Diocese of Brooklyn about priest morale. And in his survey, they said that 85% of our priests in the diocese are happy. God help those people for the other 15% that are not. But I have to tell you, I was a little surprised. I thought that number was a little high. I've seen priests at a pastor's meeting. They're not very happy. They look miserable, right? Probably for valid reasons at times, right? Our priesthood needs to radiate the joy that when we are joyful, when we are filled with happiness, people see us and want to know why. And all of a sudden, they feel inspired. All of a sudden, they are attracted to our lifestyle. All of a sudden, they are invited to enter and consider the call to priesthood. One evening, I went out to dinner with priests in our clerical shirts and simple pizzeria, and we were laughing, we were smiling, we were really enjoying our time together. And a couple came over, and a man asked if we were Catholic priests, and we said yes, in which the man said, you know, I grew up Catholic, I went to Catholic school, I go to Mass every Sunday, and I've never seen priests as happy as you are tonight. What's the occasion? My classmate said, we're priests. That's enough to make us happy. We're priests. That's enough to make us happy. No one is ever going to consider their vocation if we don't show the joy of our priesthood. And that joy is something that we cannot fake. Young people know. They can read us better than we can read ourselves. They will know if we are happy or if we are miserable. And nothing is more miserable than a miserable priest. You know, many of our dioceses are giving newly ordained priests assignments in high school ministry. And the results are positive. In those dioceses, vocations are flourishing. You ask the question, why? I don't think it's because they're younger priests and therefore they're more relatable. But it's because younger priests radiate that joy. And it's unfair to say that that joy only comes from the younger clergy. I think the pastor that I grew up with, Father James J. Muller, who was 40 years older than I was, you know, he had his ways. He had things that I probably would disagree with now about how he celebrated liturgy and his ecclesiology. But even though there were differences, we all saw a very happy priest. We saw someone who loved being a priest. And as a result, 2 members of my graduating class are priests today. And the 2 of us credit the joy of Jim Muller for that inspiration. I would look at him and I would see his joy, his happiness. Then I would look at family and I would look at parents of friends and those who had money, those who had possessions, those who had power. And they seemed unhappy. He was happy. They were not. I wanted happiness. And so I knew that I wanted to be a priest. When we speak about vocations, we can give all of the classes, we can give all of the notes, we can talk about all of the theology of priesthood, we can show great movies. The only way that we will invite, the only way that we will actually speak about vocations is when the young people see our joy and see our happiness. I am not criticizing any bishops. I know that assigning priests are difficult, but sometimes I look at when priests are assigned to high schools, and I ask the question, why? My God, why? Because I know the priest to be so negative, who always complains, who never smiles, who my grandmother would call a real miserable. Right? And then we wonder why there are no vocations coming from that school. We want young men to be priests. We want to speak about vocations. We want to invite the young men, show them that we love being a priest. Finally, we talk about the saints. And certainly the environment of saints exists, certainly what I tried to do in my school. Every classroom is named after a saint. We have feasts, we celebrate all of the feast days, we bring all of the traditions. On the Feast of Saint Therese, I buy everyone an eclair. For the Feast of Saint Joseph, they get Saint Joseph pastries. We really tried to do, it's good that I only have 140 kids, so I could afford these things. But it's good, it brings about the Catholic culture and the Catholic peace. And let me tell you, the kids love it. The young men are amazed when you speak about the lives of the saints. We had the relic of Pier Giorgio Frassati. We had the relic of Carlo Acutis. And the reverence and the respect and the time that they took with that relic, the serious approach. I didn't need to say a word, but they knew. They understood it. They were inspired. They're being introduced to these heroes, this Catholic thing. But it only works if we strive to be like those saints. It only works if we are authentic in trying to be who we are preaching and teaching about. So Father Peter talked about Carlo Acutis. We know his story. We know about his love and his devotion to the Eucharist. If I myself do not have that love and that devotion, then the story of Carlo Acutis is just a nice story that the kids like to hear. Rather, what is authentic is when we strive to live like those saints. I remember I was in the city. We were going out with my classmates. We were going to a WWF show. And beforehand, my friend said, hey, St. Francis is right across the street from Madison Square Garden. Let's go to confession. Why he was inspired to go to confession before going to a wrestling show, I have no idea.
Afterwards, maybe.
We're online, and who's there but one of our teachers. Now, that priest probably could have died that we saw him online for confession. But we saw his authenticity. We saw his desire to be a saint. We saw his goal to live what he was telling us about the saints. That's what I mean by living holiness. You know, the truth is we tried the other thing. We tried being the cool priest, the relatable priest, the transparent priest. That's not working in our schools because the answer is holiness. Holiness is what attracts. Holiness is what inspires. Holiness is what will bring people to have an encounter with Jesus. Think of those that inspired us, not just in our vocation, but in our life as disciples. We would agree that not only were they great teachers, not only were they present, we would say that they were good and holy men. About 7 years ago, when I was teaching at Cathedral Prep before I was the rector, one of the students came to me and he talked about how a new priest just arrived at his parish. And the student described him as being cool. You know, he knew all of the terminologies. He liked the same kind of music and TV shows. And he loved telling jokes that were funny. And on his day off, when he wasn't wearing his collar, he was wearing all of the new styles, right? And I knew what he was saying. He was cool and I was not. I've been accused of many things. I've been called many things. I've never been called cool. I assure you that, right? So I knew where this was going. And I said to him how wonderful it must be that you are able to go to someone so relatable and so cool for a confession. He said, Oh, no, Father. I go to the Monsignor. He's a real saint. There it is. What do our young people need? They need saints. As Mother Teresa of Calcutta would say, we don't need priests. We need good and holy priests. So when we speak about that Catholic thing of saints, it's great that we have the Catholic culture. It's great that we speak about the saints. It's beautiful that we talk about the saints. But the young people also need to see us striving to live as saints. May I speak about one of these saints, one that I had just discovered, and perhaps that you may use for your young people, specifically your young men. His name is Blessed Rolando Rivi. Has anybody heard of him? Okay, so he's a young boy at a young age, knows that God is calling him to be a priest. In fact, when family and friends would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? With confidence, with courage, and with determination, he would say, I want to be a priest. Tells us God still calls people at a young age. When I always knew I wanted to be a priest. When I was 9 years old, I was in the sacristy ready to serve mass. And the guy that was serving mass with me was this shorter kid. And the sacristan asked what we wanted to be when we grow up. And this kid said he wanted to be an NBA star. His father was 5'5". He was never going to make it to the NBA. Okay. And the sacristan said, oh, that's great. You can be whatever you want. Just try your best. You're going to do it. And he looked at me. He said, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a priest. He said, that's nice. I said, boy, maybe there's something wrong with wanting to be a priest at this age. Maybe this isn't what it's supposed to be. How interesting, right? When young people want to say they want to be a priest, they're not always encouraged. They're not always supported. The life of Rolando Rivi reminds us that God calls young people to the priesthood and that we are able to encourage and support them. Anyway, at the age of 12, he enters the high school seminary. But soon after, World War II starts. And so he's sent back home. And at home, he continues to strive to live as a seminarian. Well, the fascist who tries to destroy the church is finding and capturing all of the priests. And they find out that there's this man who's a seminarian, a future priest in Bologna. And so they go there and they discover that he's just a boy. He's 13 years old. But the head or the leader of the fascists say, hey, better for us to take care of him now than for him to be a problem in the future. And they put 2 bullets in the back of his head. Pope Francis declared him a martyr of the church and beatified him not so long ago. What's interesting, right, is his mother kind of begged him as he came home. They were in the high school seminary back then. They were allowed to wear the cassock. And his mother begged him to take the cassock off, right? Please, don't make yourself public. Don't make yourself seen. And he said, no, I can't. I can't take the cassock off. Would you imagine now they'd be sent to therapy if they had to wear a cassock at the age of 13, right? But he said the words, I belong to Christ. Now, I tell that story, not just because it's a good story to tell, not just because this young man is able to help and inspire and be a real hero for my high school seminarians, but because that's the life that we all strive to live. That we are able to be seen as people who belong to Christ. Our young people, they need heroes. Our young people need those that are an example, those that are role models, those who will inspire them and help them, who will influence every aspect of their lives. They need you. You are called to be their hero. God bless you all.
You're not allowed to be a speaker for this talk if you don't have a Northeast accent, apparently. You know, us Catholics, we've got our own identity. We've got our own culture. This was highlighted, of course, in some of the presentations given last evening, and what we just heard from Father Kuroly as well. Our identity is not in any way derived from the secularism of this world, nor is it one that makes us Catholics and us Catholic educators unable to exist alongside the world in which we live. It's kind of like that parable of the weeds and the wheat. God let them grow together, side by side. But of course, there was something distinguishing, something unique to the wheat that made it more desirable than the weeds that it was growing up alongside with. Now, we know exactly who we're living alongside of. Our students know, our parents know that too, but they chose us. They chose Catholic schools. They chose our faith. They chose our teaching. And in blue states up north, where the government and the teachers' unions are certainly not in favor of school choice, they're paying good money to be there. What about our schools makes them desirable places for families seeking to raise children who are authentically Catholic? Sometimes the answer is just as simple as acknowledging that from time to time, all it takes is someone who cares, someone who invests the time, invests the resources into doing the things that Catholics do. Catholic, after all, means universal. And that universal church is a mother and teacher. Our educational work is not philanthropic, but it's an essential part of our mission. It's based on real fundamental principles, first and foremost, of course, being the right to education itself. And our principles, as Catholics and as educators, acknowledge both the dangers and the gross lack of fulfillment found in other purely secular institutions. Yet, we would similarly teach a student, and by extension their whole family, how to be authentic, how to be real, how to be who they are, how to live what they believe in the midst of all of those other institutions existing around us. I've been a priest now for 9 years, and in every assignment I've had, there has always been a Catholic educational institution for which I've had some responsibility, either at the primary or secondary level. I am eternally grateful for that. And most recently, for the last year, I've worked in my inner city school in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was merged in kind of a botched job by my diocesan schools office just prior to my arrival there last summer. It was placed under the patronage of Saint Teresa of Calcutta, who had visited the city of New Bedford in 1995 and opened what is still an operational convent of the Missionaries of Charity there in that city. Now, just for your information, the Missionaries of Charity don't open up houses in desirable zip codes, okay? There's no plans for a Palm Beach convent of the Missionary Charities anytime soon. I make a point of being at that school every day, every single morning. My school's 8 blocks away from my church and my rectory, which is a long story, but boils down to an odd case where a parish closed, but the school remained open. And thanks be to God that it did. It's the first place I go every morning. Second place I go every morning. I go to Dunkin' Donuts and get my iced coffee first, support the local economy, and then I go over and greet the school kids. I greet every child coming into that school. I greet their parents, dropping them off. And when that bell rings at 8 o'clock in the morning, I lead the entire school in an abbreviated form of morning prayer. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together as a school. And I make a point of discussing any major feasts or saints being celebrated. The school is comprised of an extremely diverse ethnic background. Traditionally, the parish was for Portuguese immigrants. And initially, the school was majority Portuguese speaking and had school sisters of St. Dorothy, who had largely come from Lisbon and the Azores to staff the school. Today, in addition to the Portuguese families, more recent immigrant groups from Brazil, Central and South America, and several Caribbean islands choose to send their children to be enrolled in our school. We have special masses, we have processions for Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Aparecida, our May crowning of the outdoor statue of the Blessed Mother Mary will always occur on May 13th, Our Lady of Fatima. There is no other day that is reasonable to do that. Our students know the rosary is not a necklace, but more importantly, they know how to pray that. St. Teresa's embraces the Portuguese Holy Ghost devotion instituted by St. Elizabeth of Portugal that contains a 50-day novena. The Jesuit, the novena is a period of prayer, right? But it's a 50-day novena between Easter and Pentecost. And among the vast array of relics that I've managed to amass over the years, I make a point of bringing that saint's relic through the classroom on their feast day, talking a little bit about that saint at the age-appropriate level for whatever class I'm in, inviting the children to pray through that saint's intercession and to venerate that relic. Now, my relics of Saint Teresa of Calcutta and Saint Andre Bessette would be the two saints' relics of saints that are known to have visited the city of New Bedford at one point over their life. I remind the kids regularly, but particularly on November 1st, All Saints' Day, that those two saints better not be the last two saints that visited that city, because every one of them, the students, needed to be a saint, just like Teresa of Calcutta, just like Andre Bessette, who had visited the city of New Bedford at some point in their life. I had mentioned how the school is physically detached from any parish campus or any church that's open. And yet the school's office chose that location for whatever reason to have this school without any presence whatsoever of the Blessed Sacrament anywhere nearby. So I had to build a Eucharistic chapel. I put it in a very prominent place, the very center of the school, inside the front doors, so that the teachers, parents, students, all alike, could visibly see who is the beating heart of that place. They had to see it. It's not enough to just talk about it. As Father Kuroly said, the visible things matter. We had a short Eucharistic procession through the halls of the school, where I brought the monstrance into each of the classrooms, prayed for a little bit with the children, and gave benediction to each class. And as I was going to one side of the school before lunch, knowing that I was going to hit the classrooms on the other side of the school after, one of the little kids who was in a pre-kindergarten class, 4 years old, came up to me during that lunch break in between and said, Father Chris, Jesus is here. And I said, Jesus is here? How'd you know Jesus was here? And she said, Father Chris, I could smell him. I could smell him. course, the incense was wafting all throughout the building at that time. Of course, you cross your fingers a little bit that you're not going to set the fire alarm off and have visitors from the New Bedford Fire Department there. I did some things that I learned from some of the folks I talked to here. I made a point of gathering beautiful pieces of art, different pictures, scenes of our faith, images of saints, some rescued statues from our plethora of closed New England churches. And I put them all throughout our school building and in every classroom. Our middle school science room has the free Catholic scientist posters from the Word on Fire Institute, which again shows the integrity of our faith across all of the academic disciplines. Though the religious sisters have long been off the education scene in most of the Northeast, I do make a point of inviting the sisters who are still in the city to come and visit that school. The already mentioned Missionaries of Charity sisters love to come in and talk to the little kids about Mother Teresa, which is great because she's the patroness of the school and they're kind of the experts in her life. Some nearby Maronite sisters come by the school once a month. They help lead Eucharistic visits to our chapel. They help teach early habits of prayer and how to make those Eucharistic visits fruitful. And as the former vocations recruiter for our diocese, I make a point of inviting the priests in that vocations office to that school regularly so that the students know who they are. They come by and make their pitch and plant seeds about the priesthood. During Catholic Schools Week, one first grader came to school on the day that they were told to dress as your favorite teacher. Dressed as me. Black pants, a black shirt, a purple ribbon around his neck like my confessional stole, one of those little handheld holy water containers, and a mask, a COVID mask down under his chin. You know, he couldn't actually grow the beard, but I guess the mask was good for something. I laughed, but who knows, for little Owen, the seeds of something might be there. And it's because he saw me at that school regularly that he not only knew who I was, but knew how I dressed and what I did when I would come to hear confessions, when I would come to bless the students in their classrooms. In the 3 years that I worked as the vocations recruiter in my diocese, I would go and visit many of the schools. On one occasion, I had been invited into a high school to give a presentation. And of course, you never outright know the disposition of all the students that are there in front of you. You make that pitch, and as Father Kuroly said, if they don't have someone who's living authentically, joyfully the priesthood, you can make all the pitches in the world and show all the videos and things, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. So I had finished my day of visiting high school classes at Bishop Stang High School. And at the end of the day, I was approached by someone who was interested and someone who wanted more information. Ironically, it was not a student. It was a teacher. One of the theology teachers there at the school who himself had been discerning the priesthood. And he and I chatted. He finished out teaching that year. He applied to the seminary. We got him in over the summer, and he started classes that following fall. He was ordained a priest a year ago, and just a week and a half ago, on the 1st of July, was made the chaplain of the high school where he had formerly been a teacher. This is something that is Catholic. This is a Catholic thing. Because back into a community into which he already belonged, he comes now as a father, recognizing that as Catholics, we are part of a big family here on earth and in heaven. When I myself was a high school student, I remember for the first time going to the March for Life all those years ago. It was instilled in us as young men witnessing to our faith that we were doing something countercultural. Yet there we were going on pilgrimage, another Catholic thing, to Washington, D.C. Many of us for the first time in our lives, visiting the capital city, arguably the seat of all American culture, for better or worse. We were going to witness to the truth of our faith, that the culture itself desperately needed to hear. Yeah, we knew people disagreed with us. We knew that there were likely to be counter protests. We knew that there were likely to be people who would say things to us or about us or whatever, but we went anyway. Yet the Catholic things are not simply about being countercultural or eschewing the certainly abhorrent things to our faith, but also by witnessing to the truth that is authentically Catholic culture, embracing the things, even the externals, that make us and our schools uniquely Catholic. That's the stuff that's ours. Father Peter here has written many times and often argues, that from the moment of the church's emergence from the catacombs, one of the first things she did was commit herself to building and establishing and maintaining schools, beginning with monastic and cathedral schools, eventually leading to the whole university system. And let's not forget, of course, we heard yesterday that when Saint Benedict embarked on his program to revitalize a dying Western civilization, it was precisely through those schools. We heard this on his feast yesterday. It was precisely through his school that he managed to save the tattered remains of an entire Western culture. Gravissimum Educationis, that decree from Vatican II on Catholic education, said that the influence of the school on Catholic culture and in the field of education is shown in no better way than through a Catholic school. No less than other schools does the Catholic school pursue cultural goals and the human formation of youth. But its proper function is to create for the school community a special atmosphere that's animated by the gospel, animated by the spirit of freedom and charity, to help our young people to grow according to the new creatures that they were made through baptism, to develop their own personalities, and to order the whole of human culture to the news of salvation, so that by the knowledge that the students gradually acquire of the world and of life, that they are illumined by faith. Since our schools can be such an aid to the fulfillment of this mission, it's the duty of the people of God to foster dialogue between the church and the greater culture at large. To the benefit of both, it retains, even in our present circumstances, the utmost importance. Young people today, and if you're in a school already, you know this, they're pulled and buffeted in every single direction by loud and competing claims for their attention and for their allegiance. From around the world, they hear daily messages of conflict, of hostility, of greed, of injustice, poverty, despair. Some of them are living it. And amid all of this turmoil, young people are eager to find solid and enduring values, Catholic things, which give meaning and purpose to their lives. They're searching for a firm place a rock-solid foundation, a high ground on which they can stand. They're looking for a sense of direction. They're looking for a goal which gives meaning and purpose to their lives. Young people of this time are particularly sensitive to the witness of a community united in charity and love, of giving themselves to others. This is where they find Jesus. And it's our time, it's worth our time to make sure they can do that. Tolkien famously penned that there is still some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. Of course, he died in 1973, so I'm not sure if that would be nuanced 50 years later, but it's certainly worth our pondering with the Catholic things. There is still some good, and it's certainly worth fighting for. Thank you.